You're listening to The Jacob Volk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobVolk. Here he is, Jacob Volk.
Hello, sports fans! Or should I say goodbye, sports fans? That is right. This is sadly the grand finale of the Jacob Volk Show. I am the Jacob Volk. And now you're going to have to accept some cheap imitation of me. As I said, I'm not going to have too much pomp and circumstance about this. It's just not what I want to do. I'm going to do a retrospective at the end of this show. But the big sports stories come first. We've got 4 college basketball games this weekend that feature 2 ranked teams. 3 on Saturday, 1 on Sunday. Let's start with Arkansas, Tennessee. You'd be hard-pressed to find 2 more diametrically opposed teams than the Razorbacks and the Volunteers. Arkansas is all offense, good, not great defense. Tennessee is good, not great offense, but great defense. So if Arkansas is going to win this game, J.D. Note is going to need to figure out how to dissect this great Volunteers defense. Note is by far and away the best Razorback. He's averaging 18.8 points per game. No other Razorback has more than 12 points per game. I'm not saying they're bad players. Guys like Stanley Umude, Jalen Williams, and Au'Diese Toney are solid players, but Note is the straw that stirs the drink. Meanwhile, you look at Tennessee, they're led by the dynamic duo of Kennedy Chandler and Santiago Vescovi. They have some good supporting pieces in Josiah Jordan-James, Zakai Ziegler, and John Fulkerson. Obviously, no Olivier Nkamhoua. He's out for the year. He had ankle surgery. And I'll say this about Tennessee. A lot of people thought that injury would sink their chances this year. They'd really fall off. They've survived. It's like Baylor with the Tchamwa Tchatchoua injury. That injury hasn't sunk Baylor. The Nkamhoua injury hasn't sunk Tennessee. Now, Arkansas and Tennessee did go at it previously this year. It was an incredibly low-scoring game. The game was in Arkansas. The Razorbacks won 58-48. And I think history will repeat itself here. I think Arkansas has a little more firepower. I think Note will be able to solve the Volunteers' defense. It's all on him, though. If he has an off day, Tennessee's going to win. But I don't think he's going to have an off day. Now that he knows what to expect from the Volunteers, I don't see him being limited to only 13 points. And hopefully he won't get into foul trouble this time. Give me Arkansas. Moving on now to Texas, Kansas. Remember when I said you'd be hard-pressed to find two more diametrically opposed teams than Arkansas and Tennessee? Texas versus Kansas is a good contender. Texas, all defense, no offense. Kansas, really, really, really good offense, solid defense. There is no one on this Longhorns team that scares me offensively. Timmy Allen, Marcus Carr, and Andrew Jones are good players, but they're not great. But I'll say this, Chris Beard preaches defense. Texas is buying into that. Allen, Carr, Jones, and Courtney Ramey are all averaging at least a steal per game. No Trey Mitchell tomorrow. He's dealing with some personal stuff, so okay, give him his space. I totally get that. The thing that scares me is Texas wins a lot of low-scoring games. If Kansas pushes the pace, they can win this game very easily. Guys like Ochai Agbaji and Christian Braun are very capable of scoring at will. So if they get going and they get cooking and they get hot, watch out. Texas is not going to be able to keep up. Jalen Wilson and David McCormick too. Last month, these two teams went at it, and Texas barely beat Kansas 79-76. I don't see them dropping almost 80 points again. I've got to go with the Jayhawks here. Moving on now to USC, UCLA. Stay up for this game. You're going to see two really well-rounded teams going at it. Two evenly matched teams going at it. This is going to be a great game. That is, of course, assuming Johnny Juzang plays. Juzang has missed the last 3 games with an ankle injury. Who knows if he's going to play against the Trojans? You know that he's going to push for it. And look, it's a late game, so he's got a little more time to recover. But if Juzang doesn't play, the Bruins have no shot. Yes, Jaime Jaquez, Jules Bernard, and Tiger Campbell are really good players. But without Juzang, you're just missing that oomph. You're missing that guy who can take over a game and drop 20 against a really good Trojans defense, led by guys like Isaiah Mobley, Drew Peterson, and Boogie Ellis. Chavez Goodwin, too, is no slouch. I mean, I love UCLA this year. They're really well-rounded. Last year, they came out of nowhere to make the Final Four, from the first 4 to the Final Four. This year, they really could surprise some people. Again, Mick Cronin's doing an excellent job there. But with Juzang either not playing or not at 100%, I can't see how UCLA wins this game. These are two evenly matched teams. It's a shame that we're not going to see the Bruins at 100%. I mean, both teams are very well-rounded. Like I said, this could be a dogfight, but with Juzang not at full capacity, it's tough for me to pick the Bruins here. Give me USC. Now on to Sunday's game, Iowa versus Illinois. All offense, no defense. That's how I would describe both teams. Iowa embodies that more, but Illinois is in the same boat. The Hawkeyes are 5th in the nation in terms of points per game. They're putting up 83.5 points per game, but they're giving up 71 points per game. That is atrocious. But they're winning a lot. And why are they winning a lot? Because Keegan Murray is playing out of his mind. I don't know if the Big Ten has a Most Improved Player award, but if they do, Murray needs to get it. This is a guy who was an afterthought on Iowa last year. Guys like Luka Garza, Joe Wieskamp, and Jordan Bohannon were getting the headlines. Now Murray has stepped up and is averaging over 23 points per game and 8.5 rebounds per game. This guy's insane. And Jordan Bohannon's still there. Patrick McCaffrey has really stepped up this year also. Chris Murray is having a good year. This is a really good Iowa team. If only their defense was even a smidge better. If it was just a little better, I'd look at this team as a legitimate threat to win a national title. That's how great their offense is. But last year, I rolled with Iowa hard, and I got burned. Why did I get burned? Because their defense was atrocious. They gave up 74 points to Grand Canyon. They gave up 95 points to Oregon. They could put up similar performances in a couple weeks. Meanwhile, you look at Illinois, they have an offensive superstar too in Kofi Cockburn. He's averaging a double-double, 21 points and 10.5 rebounds per game. Alfonso Plummer and Trent Frazier are also really good offensively. Jacob Grandison has a shoulder sprain. It's unclear if he'll play on Sunday, but that's Sunday. A lot of things can change between now and then. If he plays, and even if he's not at 100%, that just adds more firepower to Illinois. I like Illinois this year. I think they've got a lot of depth. They're very well-rounded. Brad Underwood is doing an excellent job at that program. The last time these two teams went at it was in Iowa. It was December 6th. Illinois escaped with an 87-83 win. In Illinois, I don't see how the Illini lose this game. I think they're better. I think they're more well-rounded. Illinois' offense is better than their defense noticeably, but their defense isn't bad. That's the thing. I've got to go with the Illini here. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Volk talk. And I'll start with a really interesting report from Adam Schefter of ESPN. According to him, it's likely that the Cowboys will cut Amari Cooper. If they cut him, they will save $16 million. And the Cowboys are in cap hell right now. They're $13.5 million over the cap right now, according to overthecap.com. And also, the Cowboys need to re-sign Michael Gallup and Cedric Wilson. I'm not the biggest Wilson fan in the world. I don't think he's bad or anything, but I don't think he's great. Michael Gallup is really good, though. Yeah. I guess it makes sense to move on from Cooper. It's just tough because he's so blasted good. I understand that last year he had a down year. 68 catches for 865 yards and 8 touchdowns. The thing is, though, a lot of teams would take that. Like, I don't even think Cowboys fans are upset that that's what Cooper did. Maybe in a perfect world, those aren't wide receiver 1 numbers, but CeeDee Lamb was outstanding last year. Like, the thing is, when the Cowboys cut Cooper, and odds are they're not going to trade him, Schefter said that also. That's a really tough contract to trade. You know Cooper's going to sign, like, instantly. Depending on what happens with guys like Davante Adams and Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper becomes the best wide receiver in free agency. I'll take Cooper over Mike Williams. I'll take Cooper over Christian Kirk. Amari Cooper is a really, really, really good wide receiver. And he's young, too. He's 27. This isn't a performance-based decision by the Cowboys if they're going to cut him. This is we have to create cap space however possible decision. And we signed Ezekiel Elliott to a crazy contract. I like Ezekiel Elliott, but should he count for over $18 million against the cap? No. You've got to bring back Dalton Schultz also. I mean, realize that. The Cowboys are in a terrible spot here. Yeah, they need to cut Cooper and get very creative with the cap. I understand that, but boy, oh boy. It's going to be really, really tough for Cowboys fans to see him play for another team. I mean, Cooper is that great. And if you'll recall on my Jets offseason preview, I said that the Jets should go after a wide receiver. Yeah, I want Amari Cooper. Cooper would slot in third. It would be Adams, Godwin, Cooper, either Williams or Kirk. I forgot who I had ranked where. And Russell Gage. I really like Russell Gage. I think he's very underrated. I understand that's the nightmare scenario if you have to settle for a guy like Gage. But But I do like him. I do think he'd do a good job for the Jets. Not as good as Amari Cooper, though. Think about this wide receiver core. Cooper, Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, Braxton Berrios. I do think the Jets are going to bring him back. And David Bell. That sounds really, really good to me. I'd love Amari Cooper on the Jets. I would do backflips if the Jets signed him. Let me tell you, it's going to be really, really tough for me in a couple of weeks when the NFL offseason gets underway and the Jets make this move and that move and they miss out on this guy but they bring in this guy. It's going to be really tough for me to not have this outlet to scream about it. And March Madness, too. I had a lot of fun with those March Madness shows. It was hard to do, but boy, it was fun to talk about all those games. I'm going to miss this. There's no question about it. There is some more wide receiver news, though. According to Mike Garofalo of NFL.com, the Bills have granted Cole Beasley permission to seek a trade. And here's my question. Why? What's motivating this? Cole Beasley had a good season last year. 82 catches for 693 yards. I understand only one touchdown, but that's why you have guys like Stephon Diggs and Dawson Knox. Is the plan to give Gabriel Davis an expanded role? I'd be okay with that. I'd have no problem with that. I mean, I understand that the Bills are in a bad position with the salary cap right now. They're $6.5 million over the cap, according to overthecap.com. I mean, cutting Beasley would save the Bills $6.1 million. I just don't know why the Bills would want to move him, though. You've got to have a better way to clear cap than that. And why does Beasley want out? He's not going to land in a better spot, unless the goal is to get more money. But Beasley's 32. Who's lining up to give him a big contract? This is just confusing to me. I don't get this. For either side. I understand that the Bills have been linked to Rob Gronkowski. He's from upstate New York. He grew up a Bills fan. If Gronk wants to stay in football, he's going to have to live with not catching passes from Tom Brady anymore. Not too much of a drop-off from Tom Brady to Josh Allen. In fact, Allen may be better than Brady. In fact, he probably is. Look, I understand if you can get Rob Gronkowski, you've got to make that happen however possible. So yeah, if that means cutting Cole Beasley, cut Cole Beasley. No problem. But if you don't get Gronk, this looks kind of foolish. I don't like the Bills moving on from Beasley. I mean, let me tell you, if you need a slot receiver, call up the Bills and see what they want for Beasley. If you can get him for like a 4th round pick or something like that, that'd be great. Alright, now I'll give you some NBA Volk talk. Specifically on the Celtics signing Nick Stauskas to a 2-year deal. That's a name you haven't thought about in a while, right? Stauskas actually did play a couple games in the NBA this year. When the Heat had their COVID outbreak, they brought Stauskas in. And he wasn't bad. Played 2 games, averaged 5.5 points per game. Shot 50% from beyond the arc. Granted, he only attempted 4 threes, but I've always liked Stauskas. Always thought he got a bad rap. He was just drafted by the wrong team. There are some players that just get drafted by the wrong team. And I'm not saying that just because it's the Kings. I understand that the Kings are the Kings, but think about who they drafted the year prior. Ben McLemore. What position does Ben McLemore play? Shooting guard. What position does Nick Stauskas play? Shooting guard. Now, granted, the other options for the Kings weren't great. Noah Vonleh would have made sense, but he never turned into anything special. Neither did Elfrid Payton. Dario Saric would have made sense, but realized he wasn't going to come over from Croatia right away. The Kings were kind of screwed, but what that resulted in was Stauskas' career, in essence, being over before it started. He did not get a fair shake with the Kings. He got traded to the Sixers during the process. And it looked like he was turning into a solid 3-point shooter. Nothing great, but nothing terrible. Then the Sixers traded him to the Nets. And I didn't hate Stauskas, but he wasn't anything special. I mean, he had already been traded twice. He had never been given a fair shot. I really feel like that just messed with his confidence. Now, I'll give Stauskas credit for this. He seems to have gotten his confidence back. He was with the Grand Rapids Gold in the G League. And in the last 2 games, he's put up 100 points. He put up 57 in one game, 43 in another game. So yeah, when you do that, you're going to get NBA teams calling. This year for the Gold, Stauskas was putting up 25 points per game. He was shooting 45.5% from beyond the arc. Now here's what this deal probably is. It's probably fully guaranteed for this year, but next year not guaranteed. The Celtics will give Stauskas a shot, and if he earns his roster spot for next year, they'll keep him around. If not, alright. They didn't lose much. I mean, we know that the Celtics could use bench help. So if you want to give Stauskas minutes over a guy like Peyton Pritchard or Aaron Nesmith or someone like that, I'm all for that. I have no problem with that. Give Stauskas a shot. Let's see what he can do. I don't mind this move for the Celtics. It makes sense. Alright, now it's time for the moment that I've been dreading. My retrospective on this show. Man, this is tough. Let me tell you, I've invested a lot of time into this. A lot of energy into this. I mean, this was my baby. I didn't have much help with this. I did the vast, and I mean vast majority of the work. Did I have help from people in deciding what equipment I should use and making my office suitable for a podcast? The answer is yes, but as far as content goes and making sure it was delivered properly, it was all me. And to see this go away is tough. I mean, I'll say this. I feel kind of bad in this sense. My parents put a lot of money into this room. This room was my father's office, but he didn't use it a lot. And when I said I want to start a podcast, they said, okay, use this room. Do whatever you want with it. But the room really needed some TLC. The fan didn't work. The air conditioner didn't work. Obviously, it wasn't soundproofed. It didn't have many decorations. There was a lot of clutter. A lot of TLC went into this room. A lot of money went into this room. And now that it's not going to be used every day, I do feel bad about that. But look, when I started looking for a new job, everyone knew that this would mean the end of the Jacob Volk Show. It would have been nice if it could have kept going, but at the end of the day, that was never likely. The only way that it possibly could have happened is if I got a job that was fully remote or didn't require me to go into an office a lot, but with the pandemic subsiding for now, that wasn't gonna happen. I mean, I'll say this. I never started this podcast with the goal of being the next Joe Rogan or Don Cherry or someone like that. I did it because it was fun. I love doing this. Even on the worst days, when there wasn't a lot to talk about. Like in April or May of 2020. Or even this week or last week. No football. It was always better to do this than anything else. That was something that kept me going. At the end of the day, a lot of people would kill to be in my position. To host a podcast that was successful. Over 5,900 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you so much. So yeah, even though some days there wasn't a lot to talk about, you could find things if you looked hard enough. And like I said, even on the worst day, it was better than a lot of other people's situations. I mean, I had fun coming up with semi-recurring segments. This Day in Sports History, Mount Rushmore's, NFL Draft Grades, NFL Picks, Going Baseball Hall of Faming, Decades of Dumbass Decisions, which I'm going to keep doing just for myself. It was fun. It was fun to have this outlet to talk about the latest and greatest in sports. Twitter just doesn't do it for me. I mean, I'm on Twitter every day. Even though there are some days I don't tweet anything, I'm checking it constantly. The reason why there are some days I don't tweet anything and why I retweet a lot is because it's easier for me to vocalize my thoughts rather than writing them down. For some people, the opposite is true. Some people do both with the same level of acumen. It's easier for me to talk about the things that I'm passionate about than to put pen to paper and write about them. So to have this outlet to yell and scream about sports was a godsend. I could totally see myself coming up here and not doing anything official, but just monologuing. Like, not posting anything, but just vocalizing my thoughts. That's how passionate I am about sports. I mean, I love sports. No one loves sports more than me. The 3 months that we didn't have sports was incredibly tough. I'm not a wrestling fan anymore, but in order to have some form of competition in my life, I subscribe to the WWE Network. Didn't watch any current day stuff. I watched old-timey stuff. Stuff that I grew up watching. I mean, I was watching marble racing also. It was tough. But to have this outlet to vocalize my passion, and the fact that there were people that wanted to hear what I had to say, that could have picked any other show, radio, podcast, TV, whatever. They chose me. The fact that there were people that chose me meant the world to me. Did I ever get a Joe Rogan-sized audience? No. And that's okay. That's not how I measured success. Like I said, I never started this with the expectation of making it rich. It would have been nice. Obviously, I wouldn't have turned it down. But the way that I measured success was walking downstairs and thinking to myself, did I accomplish what I set out to accomplish? In preparing for shows, I'd write down topics that I wanted to talk about. And if I could check off all those boxes, if I could say to myself, you know what? I did a good job vocalizing my opinion. That was success to me. I also loved sharing my passion for sports history with you. I mean, I'm 24 years old, but people say to me, Jacob, you speak with the knowledge of a 50, 60, or 70-year-old. You know, I'm a student of history. I love researching sports. My parents used to keep sports encyclopedias in their cars for me to read when they were driving me places. And I never lost that passion. There are a lot of sports fans that don't know their history. Well, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. So you ignore it at your own peril. And I'll say this. I do think there's an untapped market within sports history. You know, people always say that these young kids, they don't know Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle and Mike Bossy and Brian Trottier and Joe Namath and Don Maynard and Bernard King and Michael Ray Richardson. Well, yeah, that may be true, but is that because they don't want to know? Or is that because they don't know to look it up? There are a lot of people who, when I explain sports history to them, and I talk to them about something like the 1956 World Series, or the Islanders dynasty, or Super Bowl III, or the Nets' ABA years, their eyes light up. I don't think young people are disinterested in sports history. I just don't think anyone's done a good job of explaining it to them. And I always strive to do that. Did I succeed? It's up to you to decide that, but I really, really hope that people make a concerted effort to keep history alive. That's why I did these eulogies of sports people. Not just the famous ones, but the more unknown ones. Think about a guy like Gerald Williams. Gerald Williams, let's be fair, is a footnote in Yankees history. Never won a World Series. Had a few good seasons with them. And certainly he had a stretch where he was really good, but was he one of the best outfielders of the 90s and 2000s? No. But he is important. He's important because him and Derek Jeter really got along. And I think that's interesting. You know, think about it this way. If you're a Jets fan or a Knicks fan, your teams aren't that good right now, so all you have is your history. If you don't want to know a lot about it, okay, no one's going to force you, but all this information is out there. It's up to you to search it out. And if there's no one capable of explaining it to you in your personal life, seek out podcasts or radio shows or something like that. I don't believe that people are disinterested in history. I believe that people don't know enough about it to be passionate about it. But if you seek it out, and you're able to understand the information, you'll get into it. I'm especially proud of this. The fact that this podcast lasted for over 2 years and had over 600 episodes. There are a lot of people who start podcasts and then don't do anything with them. There's no set schedule. There's not a lot of work going into it. You can hear it. That was never the case with me. If I didn't give you a show, it was always for a great reason. Whether it was a technical difficulty, or I was sick, or I was on vacation, there was always a good reason for it. It was never, oh, I stayed up all night playing video games, I don't want to do the show today. Or, no, there's nothing to talk about, I don't want to do the show today. It would have been very easy for me from like March 11th to early July of 2020 to say no shows. But I didn't do that. Every single day of the pandemic in 2020, I set out to give you a show, to put out content that I could be proud of. And I'm extremely glad to say that I did that. Whether it was just shows with the trifecta or the superfecta, or maybe there was some football stuff going on, I always gave you a show. Was it what I wanted to be talking about? No. Look, this day in sports history and Mount Rushmores and stuff like that was always designed to be semi-recurring. But during the pandemic, it was like every day. And it got annoying after a while. I'll be the first person to tell you that. I did something on Chief Bender once. My father came up to me and said, "Why did you do something on Chief Bender?" It was his birthday, or death day, whatever it was. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And I can see in the back of his mind, he's thinking to himself, why is he doing that? Who cares? Unless you're a huge baseball fan, who's going to care? Well, it's content that I can be proud of. It shows you, the listener, that I'm always going to do my best to give you something entertaining. Again, it's up to you to decide whether or not you find it entertaining, but it wasn't like I just told you about my belly button lint. It would have been very easy for me to pack it in. It would have been very easy for me some days to say no show. There were some shows that I recorded late at night. I didn't get to bed until like 4 or 5 in the morning. But I did it. Even when I tested positive for COVID, I gave you shows that week. Bet you didn't know that. Yeah, I did test positive for COVID. Would have been very easy for me to say no shows, but I could do it. I felt fine, so I did it. It was also a lot of fun interviewing authors. Sadly, I was never able to develop connections with sports writers and players, stuff like that. I mean, I tried. Believe me, I tried, but at the end of the day, it just never materialized. And that made me upset, but the author interviews were fun. And I think some of the best shows that I've ever done have contained interviews with people like Bill Ripken and Tom Van Riper and Jesse Washington and Dennis Crawford and guys like that. And one other thing that it did was challenge me to learn more about certain topics. Think about a guy like Frank Garland. Frank Garland wrote a book about Archie Vaughan. Now, I knew a little bit about Vaughan, former Pirate shortstop, Hall of Famer, died young. I knew the basics. But truthfully, I didn't know that he was a Dodger. I didn't know that he won a batting title. I didn't know that he came back in 47, Jackie Robinson's first year. So it challenged me to do my research and learn more about these people. I'm not going to know as much about any given subject as someone who's written a book about him, but I was able to learn enough to give you a good interview. You want to know the tips to doing a good interview? I'll tell you. There are 3 big ones. Number 1, know your stuff. If you're interviewing someone about Archie Vaughan or John Bassett or Penn State bowl games, whatever, do your research into those games. You should be able to hold a conversation about those topics, because that's what an interview is. An interview is a conversation. The best way that you can approach an interview is to think about it as you're at a bar, you strike up a conversation with someone next to you, and it turns out that he's an expert on this topic that you want to learn more about. Now also, this is number 2. You got to pay attention to your interviews. There are a lot of people who do interviews and they ask a question and their eyes just wander. They're on their phone doing something. They're on their iPad doing something. They're on their computer doing something. Whatever. No. Because the interviewee might say something that you want to follow up on. But if you're not paying attention, you're not going to know to ask it. Also, you may think he's going to hit on something that he doesn't hit on, and you're doing your listeners a disservice because you just skipped over one of the most important things. It would be like interviewing someone about Don Larson, but you not mentioning Game 5 of the 56 World Series. You have to be interested in the interview. Write down your questions beforehand. Know what points you want to hit on, and you'll be fine. Think about it this way. You have a goal. You have an objective that you want to complete with this interview. It can be multiple goals. It could be learning more about A, B, and C, but how are you going to do that? You've got to ask the right questions. Now, depending on who you're talking to, you don't need to be so static. You can ask a broad question and let him take it in whatever direction he wants. But if you think he's going to take it in one direction and he takes it in another, be prepared to steer it back to where you want it to go. The third thing, the most important thing, ask questions. Think back to the Tom Van Riper interview. He thinks that Greg Nettles should be in the Hall of Fame. And I don't want to re-adjudicate that here. But one point that I brought up was that if Greg Nettles was to be elected into the Hall of Fame, he'd have the lowest batting average out of any qualified hitter in the Hall of Fame. And then I went through some of the guys on the lower end of that spectrum. Ray Schalk, Rabbit Moranville, Harmon Killebrew, and guys like that. Some people would say that statement in like a questioning way and expect the interviewee to pick up on it. But what did I do? When I recited those stats, I asked him after, what's your response to that? If you disagree with an assertion that the interviewee makes, rebut it. That's fine. Or if you want to further his point in a way that he didn't, go for it. But unless you're ready to move on to the next question, you can make a statement, but you've got to follow it up with something like, what's your response to that? Or how would you answer that? Or what do you think of that? Something like that. Nothing would make me happier than for someone to take what I've done and further it. Pick up on my mannerisms, how I do things, how I break down the latest and greatest in sports, and further it. At the end of the day, I don't want this show to just be forgotten. I want people to remember it, and I want some little kid who's getting into podcasting to take what I've done and learn from it. You don't need to do exactly what I do, but, if you want to break down games the same way I do, go for it. If you want to do team-specific shows on a Monday, go for it. That's the thing. I always wanted to be a role model to the audience. That's why I didn't swear. You can swear on podcasts. I never did. I didn't think I needed to. I don't think it's necessary to have a successful podcast. And at the end of the day, I think that I have a responsibility to my listeners to lead them in the right direction. It's why I got so upset at Aaron Rodgers for what he did in regards to his COVID status. He has this massive following, more than me, and he's going to lie to them? He's going to spout this nonsense about Joe Rogan and natural immunity or whatever garbage it was? No! It is up to you, if you have this following, to lead them down the right path. At the end of the day, you are a role model. If you're offering yourself up to the public, you're a role model. And that is something that I have always kept in mind. I've also kept in mind my promise that I made to you at the beginning of this show. I'm not going to beat stories to death. You know how you watch a show like First Take or Undisputed, or you listen to a sports talk radio show? They will talk about the same topics over and over and over again, and they're not adding to that story. Now look, I understand that if it's a huge story, it can dominate multiple days, but at the same time, there are some stories that it's okay to mention just once and then move on. I'm glad to say that I never beat things into the ground. That I didn't do like a week on the James Harden trade, or a week on the Sam Darnold trade, or something like that. I also never made up stories. Shows like First Take and Undisputed will invent disagreements for the sake of disagreements. Steph Curry being a top 10 player all time, is that really worthy of Chris Russo and Stephen A. Smith ripping each other's heads off over? That's not a controversial opinion to say that Steph Curry's a top 10 player all time. You may disagree with it, but do you need to yell and scream about it? No. If someone wanted to say something like Steph Curry isn't a top 50 player of all time, okay, let's argue about that. But I'm glad that this show never became just me screaming my head off. Sometimes I did. When I needed to, I did. Alright, when I needed to yell and scream about the Yankees, I did it. But you're inventing controversy over something that isn't there when you're debating whether or not Steph Curry is a top 10 player of all time. You can disagree with it, but it's not a controversial opinion to the point that you need to yell and scream about it like that. That's the thing. It was funny, it was entertaining, it was great, I loved watching it, but that's not the most productive way to do things, in my opinion. I'd rather start it off civilly and then work my way up to the boiling point if I need to get there. That's how I always did things. Alright, I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening. I love each and every one of you. This is tough, man, let me tell you. I guarantee you, within the next month, there's going to be a sports story that gets me really upset or really happy, and I'm going to want to have this outlet to either vent or celebrate on. And I'm not going to have it. It's going to be tough. I'll still be active on Twitter, though, at RealJacobVolk. That's how you can keep up to date with my opinions on the latest and greatest in sports. Again, I thank you. I love you. I'll miss you. Until we meet again, I'm Jacob Volk. Goodbye, my friend.